see if everyone's coming through. Brilliant.
It's nice.
So there is a little bit of a latency.
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, thank you very much for coming today. Welcome to this Google Developer Group meetup for Milton Keynes. My name is Robert Lee, and I'm the organizer of the Google Developer Group here. So first of all, we're going to, what we're going to do today is, because we're doing this not only to an audience here, but also to a live feed as well, it means we're going to try and talk a little bit to both of you together. So, first of all, to you guys here, thank you very much for coming. What you're going to experience today is some amazing training. We have here Yulan Lin as well as Morgan Oh. Yulan is a Google Developer Advocate for Data Studio, and Morgan works on the back end of this stuff as well, so that's really incredible. Apart from coming to find out more about Data Studio with a talk, you'll also be experiencing as well a workshop, and those are for you who are actually in the audience today. Unfortunately, for you guys at home, you won't be able to experience that because we were going to move over to the workshop and end the live stream. Sorry about that. For those of you guys who are here as well, you're going to get pizzas, drinks, and we've got some amazing swag to give you as well later on. So looking forward to that. For you guys on YouTube, thank you very much for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe our video as well. Subscribe to our channel. Of course, you can watch it back at any point in time. Because we're also doing this in a live way, if you have any questions and you want to ask us anything, you can ask us the questions on the live chat. And if we have any time at the end of the actual stream, we're going to try and cover those off, I guess. Right, guys?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, without further ado, over to you.
Cool. Thank you. So today we're going to talk about data visualization with Data Studio. And kind of a developer edition, because this is a Google developer group. But before we get started, hey Morgan.
Yeah.
Do you want to build a dashboard? Do you want to build a dashboard? Come on, let's go and play. I never see my spreadsheets anymore. To send out my reports, it's like they've gone away. We used to be best buddies, but now we're not. And now I have so much time. Do you want to build a dashboard? Come on, let's build a dashboard.
Go away, Yulan.
Okay, bye.
All right, no, don't actually go away.
I mean, I could leave you to give this talk all by yourself.
No, thank you. I'd prefer if I had you here.
Thank you for having us tonight. My name is Yulan. I'm a developer advocate for Data Studio. In the past, I have done everything from bioinformatics, so trying to keep cells alive in the lab. I have also done nonprofit data management and reporting, which is where I have spent way too much time in spreadsheets and doing reports. And if you're on social media, you can follow me on Twitter at Y3L2N. And I've been at Google for about a year and a half now, working on this product, and I'm really excited to talk to you about data visualization in Data Studio today.
My name is Morgan. I'm a software engineer on Data Studio. I've been at Google for about 3 years. Prior to that, I've still been a software engineer, so nothing new there. And yeah, I guess for fun, I try to make latte art. I've gotten like okay at it, I guess. But yeah. Okay, so stuff we're going to talk about today. Basically, do any of you know what Data Studio is? 1%. Oh, I know you do. Okay, so 2 roughly. Okay, so a handful of you know what Data Studio is. So I guess for those of you who don't know, I'll go over a quick overview, and then later on, Yulan's going to talk about the developer features. And so yeah, so Data Studio is a business intelligence platform. So basically, that means we try to help you tell your data story. So that process kind of looks like this. The first part is to connect to your data. So we have lots of data now. You'll probably have data from like Google Analytics, if you have ad accounts, AdWords, stuff like Sheets, BigQuery, stuff like that. So the first part is to get your data and find out how to use it. The second part is to extract insights from your data. And so stuff like filtering, sanitizing it, you'll do all of that as part of your pipeline. And the third part is visualizing your findings. This part is where you make charts to showcase what you found. And then the last part is to share your story. So to basically present to stakeholders, colleagues, interesting things that you want them to maybe take action on. So instead of just talking about it, we can go do a live demo. So for the first part, to connect to your data, in Data Studio, you would create a data source. And so this connects to a bunch of other data, or connects to your data through connectors. In this case, we're going to be using a Google Sheets connector, but as you can see, we have a lot of other connectors. And so I have this sheet here called animals. It's got animals, I guess puppies, kittens, bunnies from a bunch of dates, random view numbers, a couple links. And so yeah, so we'll make a data source out of that. So after I hit connect, you'll get a very quick overview of what the schema looks like. So these are all of the dimensions and metrics that we have. Since this is a Sheets data source, none of this data is typed. So like, there's no way for us to know that this was a date. This is just numbers kind of basically. But in Data Studio, we try to do something smart. And so we take a look and we're like, oh, this kind of looks like a date. So we'll type it as a date. But there are some times when we get it wrong. So like in this animals one, the average happiness and adoption rate, those are both percentages, but we've had them as numbers here. So you can manually update that and say, these are actually percentages. And so let's see. Another thing is you can create custom formulas. So over here, you'll see that there was a thumbnail URL and an Academy URL. The thumbnail URL is actually just an image. So I can create a field that says thumbnail instead of just thumbnail URL. And there's a function just like you have in Sheets. Or I guess functions like Sheets functions, where you can create an image based off of the thumbnail URL. And if you save it, this field, which wasn't actually in your data, will now be saved as a new dimension. And you can do other stuff, like if I wanted to create a image link, you can create a hyperlink out of the Academy URL, which will link to an Academy site that I'll show later, and then have the thumbnail be clickable later. Yeah, and so other parts of the data source are the data credentials. So right now this is using the owner's data credentials. This basically means that if I were to share this data source out to other people, they would just be using my credentials. So like if I shared this to Yulan and she doesn't have access to the sheet, she can still access this data because it's using my credentials to access the sheet. But if I wanted to do viewers' credentials and I shared this to Yulan, she would not be able to see this because it would be using her credentials at that point and she doesn't have access. So I'll just keep it here for now. Data freshness. This is basically how often we'll try to fetch new data. This is nice because for stuff like BigQuery, you get charged for how many times you query your data source. And in this case, you don't want to query that often, otherwise you might end up paying a lot more than you probably want to.
Hey,
yeah.
Does everyone here know what BigQuery is? Who is familiar with Google BigQuery? Okay. So Morgan, what's BigQuery?
BigQuery is, let's see. That's a good question.
Right. I'm sorry? Yeah, basically.
Yes.
It's a Google Cloud hosted data warehouse where you can put a lot of your data.
Yeah.
And so if you have kind of larger amounts of data than perhaps might fit well in a Google Sheet, you might have data in BigQuery, or you might be using BigQuery.
Yeah. But yeah, so you can update the frequency of how often we pull for data. In this case, the default is every 15 minutes. There's a tab about community visualizations, but Yulan's going to talk about that later. And then, yeah, the field editing reports is just if you can access, or you can make changes to the fields in reporting. So yeah, let's get into the report. So the first step, you'll be prompted to add a data source to the report. And then, so let's start with a pie chart. And then, so yeah, so this is the basic charts that we have. Tables, scorecards, time series. So if I were to copy and paste this, and I wanted to change it, you could do it over here as well. And so we pre-populate charts with a dimension and a metric. And if you wanted to keep these, you could just select, well, select a different chart to switch to. And then it'll keep your dimensions and metrics the same. And you can also add different ones. So like that image link I added earlier, we can make that part of the data as well. And also, I guess I'll add time series. So you can also do stuff like breaking down stuff. So in this time series, I want to break down by animals. Right now it has, oh, let me make this smaller. It has views over time. But if I were to break it down by animal, you can see how many views each animal got over time. And it looks like puppies are winning. Let's see. And then there's also stuff like, you can have viewer controls. So if I were to add like this here, so this is in edit mode, but when you share it out to people, you'll be sharing out in view mode. And so basically they can then interact with the report. So, oh, actually, let me add date to this table. Okay, cool. So you'll be able to see, oh wow, that's a lot of puppies. You'll be able to see that the chart is very interactive. You'll get tooltips when you hover over, so you don't have to like guess how many like views it has at a certain period in time. And then so this date range filter allows you to do stuff like if I wanted the last 7 days, it'll filter all the data on the report to show the last 7 days. And then recently we added a new feature like rolling date ranges. So you can set an advanced date range of, let's say, yeah, 7 days ago to yesterday. So this gives you a week's worth of data. But the cool thing about rolling date ranges is if I were to share this with someone and they were to open it like, let's say tomorrow, they would get a week prior, or like 7 days based off of tomorrow's date instead of based off of today's date. Let's see, and yeah, so that's a very brief overview of what Data Studio is.
Hey, Morgan.
Yeah.
So what if I wanted to use one of my charts to filter other charts?
Oh, right, yeah, okay, cool. So yeah, you have chart interactions as well. So here, there's an interactions panel. And if I say apply filter, that means that this chart will act as a filter. So like this date range control here, it acts as a filter for the rest of the charts on the page. But if I were to click on this chart now, so like puppy, oh, that's a bad example, it's already puppies. Kittens, it'll filter all the charts to show kitten data. So this is just all the kitten views. And then these were image links, I think. Oh, sorry, yeah, it is an image link. So if I were to click it, it should take me through to here. And so this is the Analytics Academy. For those of you who are interested in learning more, or like you want to onboard colleagues because you want them to use Data Studio as well, there's an introduction for Data Studio right here.
I have one more question, Morgan.
Yeah.
So if you go back into edit mode, we go into the property panel.
Okay.
Well, if you select like the time series maybe,
Okay.
I see this thing called optional metrics.
Optional metrics. Oh, yeah,
What do
okay.
those do?
Sure. So this isn't really a feature that's released yet.
This is on our demo.
Oh, really? Wow, that's cool. It launched. Never mind. Okay, so this is a feature that our intern was working on over summer. Nice. So this allows you to select optional metrics. So when you share out a report, let's say I wanted to show people a report with views over time, but also adoption rate and average happiness generated. Before, you would have to make 3 charts to show all of this, or you could match them. You can match them all into one chart, but like the viewer would not be able to choose what they wanted to do. So in this case, I can have all of these in this chart, and then so now there's a new optional metrics thing in the header, and that lets you choose basically whatever option the viewer wants to see instead of what you're prescribing them to see. Yeah.
And so for those of you who are kind of familiar with Google Docs and Google Sheets, that idea of somebody can view something without necessarily being able to edit the underlying report or document kind of applies in Data Studio. So kind of exposing this functionality to somebody you don't necessarily want to touch the rest of the report might be sort of useful.
I think that happens a lot with finance because you've got sheets like budget trackers as an example, where you've got fields and formulas that you don't want to other people messing with, but at the same time you want them to still see the data. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess moving along with the presentation, Yulan will talk more to you about community stuff.
Yeah. So let me go back and present.
Yeah.
So we kind of talked you through Data Studio as a product, but this is a developer meetup. So I wanted to talk to you about some of the APIs that we've built in to allow you to extend and customize the product. So specifically, there are 2 things that we've done. We've allowed you to create your own custom connectors. So you can already connect to a lot of data sources. There's Google Analytics, Ads data sources, BigQuery. If you have data in MySQL or Postgres databases, you're also able to connect to those and bring them all into one database, or into one dashboard, excuse me. But we've also created a way to connect to data that might lie outside of those things. The second thing you can do as a developer with Data Studio is to create your own custom visualizations. Right? We recognize that the charts that we showed in the dashboard do not represent the entire universe of possible data visualizations, and wanted to provide a way to extend the platform. So these are the 2 developer features. And I'm going to talk first about community connectors. So community connectors are built by third parties. There are some third parties who have chosen to kind of go through this submission process and actually be featured in our in-product gallery. And so we currently, I think, have 130 connectors to 500 sources, which there might be more now. And I'm going to show you really quickly what that looks like. So if I go back to Data Studio, and I go to data sources, and I create a new data source. So these are the Google connectors up top, right? These are the ones that we build. But if you scroll down, and if you wanted, for example, to use other data sources, right, you see that folks who want to report on Reddit or other ads data, Asana, right, for kind of project management things. There's a whole host of these third-party connectors that you can use, or you can build your own, right? So community connectors are free to use and develop. They use something called Google Apps Script, which is similar to JavaScript, and you can connect to any internet accessible data. So if you, for example, had some kind of weather API that was relevant to your reporting, or you subscribe to kind of a surveys service that you wanted to bring into your dashboard as well, you can write your own connector and bring that directly in. Another use case for these is also if you wanted to do some custom caching and authentication. Right? We recognize that some data sources are expensive to query or slow to query. And so if you wanted to implement some custom caching, perhaps using Firebase, AppScript, which this feature is based on, also has some caching. You can kind of decrease the latency of some of those expensive queries or maybe save some money on queries. You can also potentially implement some more custom authentication. If you had data that you knew you wanted to restrict the access of, or you wanted to, I think, do some row-level data ACLs, access restrictions, you can also implement those in community connectors. And so developers.google.com/datastudio/connector is the link to that documentation, and I've provided a screenshot of the code lab to get started. Demo. I showed you what community connectors look like, and you'll actually all build one later tonight in the workshop. How do you code one? Kind of a quick overview. You use Google Apps Script. You need a data source to bring the data from, and potentially authentication info. That's not required, but we also do support that for those data sources that require some sort of credentials. And this is a quick overview of how connectors work. I don't expect you to remember any of this. I'll actually go over this again later before the workshop. But what happens is that the user selects the connector in Data Studio. So you saw that place where I could kind of pick between all of these different connectors to data sources. And what happens when that is done is that this getAuth type function is triggered. And this getAuth type function is one of the functions that you'll write or that somebody else has already written. And that just says, this is the authentication needed, triggers that flow if needed. The next thing is getConfig. So if there's any kind of configuration that the user has to put in, right? If, for example, I'm looking at, I don't know, a Twitter feed, and I only cared about tweets from a particular username, and I needed the person configuring this data source to put in the Twitter handle of the person they cared about, right? This is where I would configure that. The next thing is getSchema, right? And this kind of just shows the fields. You saw where Morgan was editing the fields of that sheet's data source, right? That's what's happening there. And then the user does some edits, some confirmations, and then you show the Data Studio dashboard. User adds a chart, and when user adds the chart, that's when the getData function is called. And I'll explain all of these in more depth. But to build a community connector then, if you're the one writing the connector, you just have to define 4 functions, right? What is the authentication? What does the user need to configure? The schema, what does the data look like? And getData, how am I getting that data? So the next thing I want to talk about is community visualizations. And because this is about 99% of my job, I might get a little excited, so please bear with me. Community visualizations are what I was telling you about, where we basically say, here's a blank canvas and your data, do what you want, right? How creative can we be, right? Whether it's in a particular chart type, we've heard people ask for Gantt charts or heat maps, or really fancy sunbursts or flow diagrams. You're able to build that. Or if you have a company or a client that really cares about internal branding and consistency, you're able to make some of those changes and customizations to fit your needs. And so and I think I forgot to put the caveat on this slide, but this is a feature that's in developer preview. And so what that means is that the feature is public, anyone can use it. It also means we recognize that there's a lot of work to do, right? And so some of the things I show you, especially with the user ad flow, we know that there's a lot of work to make it easier for people who aren't developers to use. So kind of this is the part where we're saying the thing is ready to use, we know it adds value, but if you're using it and you have really strong opinions, or there are ways that you know we can make it better, we're working on it, and also we want to hear your feedback. So I've talked about this. I want to show you some of my favorite community visualizations that people outside of Google, people who aren't me, have built. And so, let's see. I didn't, okay. So this is a heat map of where baseball home runs were hit. And I should have loaded these before. But essentially what it is it's a heat map, right? It's XY coordinates, and then it's layered over a baseball field, and it's not.
Here, I can fix it.
Can you fix it? Also, yes. Is it just clear cache?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Here.
Okay.
And live demos are always dangerous, so.
Huh.
Yes. I
Okay.
promise you this is cool. I will show you later. Right. Another thing that I found really cool is, so this is somebody who animated a bar chart over time, right? So you can see kind of the time incrementing here in the bottom. And as time passes, you see the changes in the values and how things are ranked changing. And so this is, I think, something really fantastic that I would put maybe on a TV screen, a dashboard, for people to see. The last thing that I want to show you that has been built by the community is this sunburst diagram. So you can click on an arc, you can zoom in, the legend shifts as you do that and interact with it. So that's pretty cool. And so these are some examples of cool visualizations that people have built. What does it look like to use a community visualization? Let's see, create report. So here's the ADA chart. Right next to it, to the right, is this community visualizations and components, right? And so you can add one of the visualizations that we've kind of pre-populated. I've built a couple of these. You'll have to enable it at a data source level, right? And so you can add a sunburst, and this will look interesting. I'm not sure that this data is particularly useful with a sunburst. You can also add a chart, for example, if you're writing a community visualization, which some of you will in the workshop, and you have the code somewhere, you can tell Data Studio, hey, this is where I've put the code, and I'm going to load in a Sankey diagram, right? And one thing I really quickly want to point out is that you can change the styling or configure some of the styling just like you would any other chart in Data Studio. So what this allows you to do is, if you're a developer, you have a bunch of people in your that you're working with who are really scared of code but want that really pretty chart, right? You can write it, you can distribute it to them, and say, hey, you can still make this configurable, customizable, without them having to go back into the code. And so because we'll be building one later, I'm going to talk really quickly about what it takes to build a community visualization. It's a little bit more involved, so you have to have 3, maybe 4 files. One is the manifest file. So the manifest file is a bunch of metadata. So you saw when I was doing that click to add flow of a visualization I'd built, there was a thumbnail, there was a title, my name was on it. This is where you configure all of that information. It's also where you tell Data Studio, hey, this is where the other files for this visualization are located, right? The next file you'll need is this JSON file, myviz.json. And so it doesn't have to be named that, but I'm calling it that for the purposes of this. And that provides data and style information, or potentially interactions information. So that's just saying, hey, I want the user to be able to put in 2 dimensions and 1 metric, or 4 dimensions and 2 metrics. This is where you would provide those options. In terms of styling, this is also where you would say, I want them to be able to pick a fill color and a font color, and also like select a number that's going to be fed to my visualization. And so that's where you would configure all of those options. Next is the JavaScript code. So this is basically where the bulk of your visualization is going to happen, right? Data Studio says, here's the data that the users selected, and that JavaScript code is what will actually work the data into the form that you need, and also render the visualization on the page. The last optional file is a CSS file, and that's like any other CSS file providing styling for your visualization. And so how does a community visualization work? Before I go through this flowchart, I don't know if I've said before, but a community visualization is essentially an iframe, for those of you familiar with web programming, where Data Studio says, hey, this is the data that you saw kind of in the property panel where I was configuring the data. Hey, this is that data the users configured. I'm going to execute your JavaScript on that data. I'm going to execute the code you write. And so the flow is the user enters visualization ID, or it does the click to add thing, and Data Studio is like, okay, you've told me where to load the files from. I'm going to go grab those files, right? Data Studio reads that manifest, that metadata file, and then says, okay, I've read this metadata file that tells me what other files to grab. I'm going to load them into this iframe, right? And then the iframe, when things are loaded, tells Data Studio, hey, I'm ready for data now. And Data Studio says, okay, you're ready for data. Here's your data. And then that JavaScript code is run that you've written on that data. So that's kind of the overall flow of a community visualization. I've talked about this program, this feature being in developer preview. If you use it tonight and you think it's the coolest thing ever, and you want to be featured in the product, you want to be featured in some of the galleries that we're building, please let me know. I also have all of the information at this URL, developers.google.com/data-studio/visualization/developer-preview. It's a long URL. If you're interested, I can email it to you. But what it is it's basically an opportunity to say, like, if you want to build a visualization that you think will be of value to other people who use the product, we would love to have you as part of that ecosystem. Yeah. So what did we cover, right? We talked about what is Data Studio. So do all of you have some idea of what Data Studio is now? A little bit, yeah. So that was one of our goals. The other thing was to talk about the developer features, right? What are the ways that you can extend the platform, customize things to really fit your use cases? And so with that, I think, thanks for having us. And I think that concludes kind of the talk portion, at least.
Okay, thank you very much, Yulan. Thank you very much, Morgan. That was incredible. It was so cool to see the way how, like, you made the community, am I getting this right? The community visualizations, which are effectively like templates, aren't they?
Right.
The templates that you make so that other people can use them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and it's, I know we're talking about like Google Sheets and stuff, but a lot of people, especially businesses, tend to use things like Excel, etc. But all of these are then able to then be just pulled straight into a Google Sheet directly,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right, and you can also upload a CSV and use that as a data source. Or if you have a CSV that kind of lives in Google Cloud Storage, that can also be pulled in.
Okay,
Yeah.
so say for example, I'm just thinking of use cases for businesses and people who do this sort of stuff every day.
I have one.
Okay,
right.
go on
So
then.
I've talked to a couple people who have some kind of analysis workflow that emails them a CSV or an Excel spreadsheet. And so, or they have that analysis workflow running off of a Google Cloud function, for example, and again, it's outputting a CSV. If you have that instead load either into a Google Sheet or into a Google Cloud Storage bucket, that becomes then one of your inputs to a Data Studio dashboard, and you don't have to go in and kind of remake a report every time that analysis is run.
Right.
And then you can also then pull in data, like if you have some CRM data, right, and you want to pull that in as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking of the perspective of businesses that I've been involved in.
Right.
You definitely tend to get like a lot of CRM data coming through, such as like, you know, last purchase, revenue, over time, that sort of stuff. And then also whether or not that person's been contacted, for example, within the last 6 months, etc., and so on. But very little work is actually sometimes done to start categorizing that and making sure that that data is queried properly. So you're saying that Data Studio is something that could potentially make that happen just seamlessly on the fly, right?
Right, so we have ways for you to, we didn't show this, we have like a Explorer, like a quick analyze feature. But also if you're a first level analyst and you've kind of put all these filters on your report, one of the things we didn't show but is possible is this stateful sharing. So it's like, I've already kind of put all these filters on, I want to highlight these things to my management. I'm going to create a link that shows exactly this view so that I can send it off to kind of some kind of executive or my manager and say, hey, look at what the data is showing, what should we do?
Yeah.
It's also a great thing for, maybe we have scheduled reports available, right? So if you want to start off your day and just review like, hey, what happened?
Yeah, and it'll just automatically email it to you
Right.
and stuff like that. So that's really, really cool, especially if you've got things, I know some businesses have like weekly pulses and stuff where they make sure that they speak to the executive and say, well, look, these are the numbers for the day, this is what we need to start pulling out. So in effect, you can automate all of that entirely without having to do anything, it just runs effectively.
Right, it runs, you can get stuff from different data sources in the same place.
Yeah, and you don't have to do anything, as long as those connectors are already set up, it should in theory just work.
Right, yeah.
Cool, awesome. So that's great. Thank you very much, guys. Yeah. For those of you who are watching this on YouTube, definitely check out the PDF which is attached to the description of the YouTube video itself. If you do have any questions about any of the stuff that Morgan and Yulan have spoken about today, just let us know, write it in the comments box. And I'm sure you guys are on YouTube anyway, so you can just probably respond back to those as time goes on. Okay, so with that, thank you very much and see you later. Bye.